The sound of rain had always comforted Linda Myers, but that evening it felt different, heavier somehow, as if the sky itself had decided to share her worries. She stood by the living room window, watching the water slide down the glass in shimmering trails. Outside, the world was gray, blurred, and quiet. Inside, the house was filled with the soft hum of silence, the kind that only exists when life slows down after years of noise, laughter, and movement. For Linda, silence had become both a friend and a stranger. It had been 6 years since her husband Daniel passed away unexpectedly. 6 years since she'd learned to live with empty chairs and half-finished conversations. Her son Ethan had been 17 then, quiet, kind, with his father's eyes and her stubborn streak. Now he was 23, working long hours at an auto repair shop across town. He still lived with her to save money, but lately, it felt like he was living around her, moving fast, chasing dreams, rarely slowing down long enough for more than a short dinner chat or a tired smile. Linda understood. That's how life went. Children grew, mothers adjusted, and the walls learned to hold stories no one spoke aloud anymore. Still, sometimes at night, when she passed his room and saw the faint glow of his phone light under the door, she would whisper softly, "Good night, my boy," and imagine him as the little child who used to fall asleep to bedtime stories and the scent of rain. Tonight, though, something felt different. The air had that tense stillness that comes before an unexpected change, the kind you can't name until it's already begun. Linda sighed and turned toward the kitchen. She was about to make tea when she heard it, a sudden crack followed by the unmistakable sound of rushing water. It came from the hallway. "Not now," she muttered, setting the kettle down. She hurried toward the noise, heart pounding. The pipes, those old, groaning, overworked pipes she'd been meaning to replace for years, had finally given up. A thin stream of water gushed from the ceiling, spreading fast across the floor. Within seconds, the carpet was soaking, and the once peaceful house turned chaotic. "Ethan," she called out instinctively. Footsteps pounded down the stairs. "What happened?" he asked, eyes widening at the sight. The pipes burst again. "It's flooding." He didn't hesitate. Without another word, Ethan dashed toward the basement. She heard the clang of metal, the squeak of a valve, and then silence. The rushing water slowed, then stopped. Ethan reappeared, drenched from head to toe, his hair plastered to his forehead. "Got it? Main line shut off," he said between breaths. Linda exhaled, clutching her chest. "Oh, thank goodness." They both stood there for a moment, the floor around them glistening with shallow puddles, reflecting the faint light from the living room lamp. The smell of damp wood filled the air. Ethan took a deep breath and looked at his mother. "We can't stay here tonight, Mom. The floorboards are soaked and the heating system's going to take in water." Linda frowned. "But where would we even go?" He hesitated only a moment before answering. "I'll find a place. Just pack an overnight bag." Linda wanted to protest, to remind him she wasn't helpless, that she could handle it, but the exhaustion in her bones told her otherwise. Sometimes love meant letting someone else take the lead. As she walked to her room to pack, she glanced back at Ethan. He was already moving furniture, trying to save what he could from the spreading water. His determination reminded her so much of Daniel that it hurt. That same quiet strength, that same way of stepping up when life fell apart. She blinked back tears, whispering to herself, "He really is his father's son." By the time they locked up the house and stepped into the stormy night, the world had softened into a misty blur of rain and streetlight. The neighborhood was still, everyone else safe and dry inside their homes. Unaware of the small crisis unfolding on Maple Street, Ethan helped his mother into the car, holding an umbrella over her as if she were fragile glass. She wanted to tell him she wasn't, that she'd faced far worse storms. But something about his quiet care stopped her. As the car pulled away from the driveway, Linda looked back at the faint glow of their porch light. It flickered once, then went out completely. The road ahead shimmered with rain. Neither of them spoke, but inside Linda's heart, 1,000 unspoken thoughts stirred, memories of a life once filled with laughter, fears of growing older alone, and a faint aching hope that maybe tonight would change something. Maybe not everything broken. It's had to stay that way. When they reached the small hotel on the edge of town, Ethan parked and turned to her with a tired smile. "It's not fancy," he said, "but it's warm." Linda nodded, too, moved to reply. She realized in that moment that the world hadn't just given her a storm. It had given her a moment to see her son differently. Not as a boy needing care, but as a man quietly giving it. As they stepped into the soft glow of the hotel lobby, the warmth hit her like sunlight after winter. And though she didn't yet know it, this night, born from a flood, would wash away. More than just water. It would wash away the silence between them. The hotel room smelled faintly of lavender and rain. Linda set her small travel bag on the chair and took a slow breath, feeling the unfamiliar stillness of the space. It wasn't home, but it felt safe. A little cocoon away from the chaos, waiting for them back at the flooded house. Ethan pulled off his damp jacket, hung it on the hook near the door, and turned on the heater. Warm air began to hum softly through the room. "There," he said, smiling faintly. "Give it a few minutes, and it'll feel like summer in here." Linda nodded, her eyes wandering around. The walls were soft beige, the lamps glowed gently, and the rain outside drummed a rhythmic lullaby. She sat by the window again, watching the city lights shimmer in the wet streets below. Ethan came up beside her, holding 2 steaming cups of tea. "Chamomile," he said. They had it in the lobby. He accepted the cup, the warmth seeping into her palms. "You remembered," she said softly. He smiled. "Of course I did. You used to drink it every night when I was a kid. You'd tell me it helped you dream better." Linda chuckled lightly. "I told you that so you'd go to bed early." Ethan laughed, a deep, genuine sound that filled the quiet room. It was a sound she hadn't heard in so long as they sipped their tea. A comfortable silence settled between them, not empty, but full of things neither knew how to say. Linda looked at her son, really looked at him. The boy who used to follow her around the house now looked every bit a man.com/steady kind. He had Daniel's same quiet strength, that same habit of thinking before speaking, the same spark of warmth in his eyes. "I remember the first time you fixed something on your own," she said suddenly. Ethan looked at her curiously. "Yeah, you were maybe 12? The washing machine stopped working, and I was ready to call a repairman. But you sat there with a screwdriver and said, 'Let me try, Mom.' I thought you'd make it worse." Ethan grinned. "And I did." The whole thing flooded the laundry room. Linda laughed, covering her mouth. "Yes, but then you figured it out. You really did. You got it running again." You looked down, smiling. "I guess I just hated seeing you worry." Those words hit her harder than she expected. She looked at him, her son, her companion through every storm, and wondered if he even knew how much he had carried for her. After Daniel's death, there had been years when life felt too heavy, too silent. Linda had gone through the motions, working, paying bills, cooking dinner, but some part of her had stayed frozen in grief, and Ethan, still a teenager, had learned too soon what it meant to fill in the empty spaces left behind by loss. The rain outside softened into a quiet drizzle. Linda leaned back, her thoughts slipping to the past. She remembered the first winter after Daniel's funeral. The snow had piled high against the windows, and the house had felt colder than usual. She'd been too numb to decorate for Christmas that year. But one morning, she'd come downstairs to find Ethan, only 18 then, standing by the fireplace, stringing lights on a small artificial tree he'd bought with his savings. He'd turned around and said, "Dad wouldn't want it to feel empty, Mom." He had cried then, not out of sadness, but because his heart had shone so brightly through all that darkness. Even now, sitting beside him years later, she felt that same warmth. "You've grown up so much," she whispered. Ethan glanced at her, puzzled by the emotion in her voice. "I'm still me, Mom." "Yes," she said quietly. "But sometimes I look at you and realize I blinked, and the little boy who used to build forts in the living room is gone. I guess that's what mothers do, blink, and time slips away." He looked down at his cup, his expression softening. "It slipped away for both of us." Linda turned toward him. "What do you mean?" He hesitated. "I think After Dad passed, I tried to be strong. I didn't want you to worry. But maybe I built too many walls. Maybe we both did." Her throat tightened. He wasn't wrong. They had both been trying to protect each other, two hearts grieving in silence, afraid to show how fragile they really were. She reached out, placing her hand over his. "You don't have to be strong all the time, Ethan." He looked at her, eyes glimmering with something that felt like relief. "Neither do you, Mom." The moment hung in the air, gentle, full, unspoken. Outside, a car passed through the rain, its headlights reflecting against the wet glass. The world moved on as if nothing had happened, but inside that small room, something had shifted just slightly, just enough. The distance between pale light spilled through the hotel curtains, brushing against the beige walls and catching the steam rising from a small coffee pot near the window. The storm had finally passed. The air felt fresh, new. Somehow, like the world itself had taken a deep breath overnight. Linda stirred awake to the sound of quiet movement. She opened her eyes to see Ethan standing by the desk, talking in a low voice on his phone. He was dressed in a clean shirt, hair still a little messy from sleep, his face calm but focused. "Yes, the water main's off," he was saying. "We'll need someone to check the flooring and maybe the insulation too." "Yes, thank you. You can call my number for updates." He hung up and turned, startled to find her awake. "Hey," he said softly. "Didn't mean to wake you." Linda sat up slowly, smiling faintly. "It's all right. You sound like a man who knows what he's doing," he chuckled. "Trying to. I called the plumber already. They'll be there by noon." The sense of responsibility in his voice made her heart swell. For so long she had carried everything alone, every bill, every decision, every quiet fear that came with raising a child on her own. But now, seeing Ethan step in with calm confidence, she realized that life had shifted. He wasn't just her boy anymore. He was her anchor now, too. They decided to have breakfast in the hotel cafe downstairs. The place was warm and bright, filled with the scent of coffee and the sound of soft morning chatter. A few travelers sat scattered across the room, their voices blending into a gentle hum. Linda and Ethan found a small table near the window. Outside, puddles sparkled in the sunlight. "Feels strange to be here," Linda said, stirring her coffee. "Almost like the world pushed pause on everything." Ethan nodded. "Yeah, maybe it's a good thing. We never really slowed down anymore." She smiled, looking at him. "You sound older than your age." He grinned. "Guess life does that to people who fix pipes at 2 a.m. They laughed, an easy, comfortable laugh that came from somewhere familiar. But as the laughter faded, a quiet feeling lingered, something heavier, unspoken, but not sad. Ethan reached for his phone and showed her a photo. "Look what I found last night while I was waiting for the plumber's text." It was an old picture of them taken on a camping trip years ago. Linda was sitting by a small fire, roasting marshmallows, her hair tied back and her smile bright. Ethan, maybe 10 at the time, was sitting beside her, leaning against her shoulder, both of them laughing at something out of frame. "Oh my goodness," she whispered, her fingers brushing the screen. "Look at us. You were just a little boy." Ethan smiled softly. "Yeah, you look so happy there." She nodded, lost in memory. Your dad had just taught you how to fish that morning. You were so proud of that tiny trout you caught." Ethan's smile faded into something gentler. "I don't really remember that part. I just remember how peaceful you looked." The words caught her off guard. She blinked, feeling a warmth rise in her chest. "Peaceful, huh? I didn't feel it then. I was scared most of the time, scared of not doing enough, of losing what we had. But I guess happiness shows up in ways we don't notice." Ethan studied her for a long moment. "You were stronger than you think, Mom." Linda lowered her eyes, her throat tightening. She wanted to answer, but the words tangled somewhere inside her. Instead, she reached for her coffee, holding it close as if its warmth could steady her. They finished breakfast and stepped outside. The air was crisp, washed clean by the rain. The parking lot shimmered in sunlight, and somewhere nearby, a bird sang from a wet branch. As they walked toward the car, Ethan stopped suddenly. Wait here, he said, then jogged back toward the hotel lobby. Linda frowned but stayed put, watching him through the glass doors. He was talking to the front desk clerk, then gesturing toward her. A minute later, he returned, holding something small wrapped in tissue paper. "What's that?" she asked, curious. He handed it to her with a shy grin. "It's nothing fancy. I saw it last night in the little shop next to the lobby, but they were closed." Linda unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a simple silver keychain shaped like a tiny house, engraved with the words, "Home is where love stays." She stared at it, speechless. "I thought maybe—" Ethan hesitated, scratching his neck. "I thought maybe we could hang this on the new house key when everything's fixed. You know, kind of a new start." Linda's eyes filled instantly. She blinked, trying to laugh it off. "You always know how to make me cry." He smiled softly. "You taught me how to care. I'm just returning the favor." In that small parking lot under a clear blue sky, something inside Linda shifted again. Not because of the gift, but because of the heart behind it. For years, she had thought love only moved in grand gestures, weddings, anniversaries, promises whispered in the dark. But now she understood real love lived in the quiet things. In a son remembering his mother's tea, in a keychain bought on a rainy morning, in a shared laugh over breakfast after a flood. It wasn't about fixing broken pipes. It was about mending something deeper, the small, invisible cracks time had left in their hearts. As they drove home later, the city gleamed in sunlight. Linda held the keychain in her hand, turning it slowly, letting the metal warm against her skin. Ethan glanced at her from the driver's seat. "You okay?" She nodded, smiling through tears. "I think so. It's strange. Everything's a mess back home, but I feel lighter." He smiled. "Then maybe the mess did us a favor." Linda looked out the window, watching the wet trees blur by. Maybe it did. And in that quiet golden morning, the distance between mother and son disappeared completely, replaced by gratitude, understanding, and a kind of love that doesn't fade with time. The drive back home was quiet. The sun had climbed higher now, spreading soft gold over the wet roads. Every puddle shimmered like a tiny mirror, and the scent of rain still lingered in the air. Linda sat in the passenger seat, watching the passing trees, her fingers gently tracing the small silver keychain resting in her lap. Ethan hummed softly to the radio, an old tune from the 90s that she remembered playing in the car when he was little. The music filled the silence between them, not loud, just enough to feel like a memory had come back to sit with them for a while. Linda smiled faintly. "You still remember this song?" Ethan glanced at her, grinning. "Of course. You used to sing it every morning on the way to school. I thought you sounded better than the real singer." She laughed softly. "That's because you were 7 and didn't know better," he chuckled, his eyes flicking back to the road. "No, I think I knew. You always made mornings feel easy." Linda looked out the window again, hiding the emotion that tugged at her. Easy. It had been so long since life felt that way. When they pulled into the driveway, the house looked tired but familiar. The storm had left its mark, a few branches scattered across the yard, muddy puddles near the porch, and a faint water stain creeping along the front wall. Yet somehow, it still felt like home. They stepped inside carefully. The air smelled damp, the floors cold beneath their feet. A faint drip echoed from the living room ceiling. Ethan surveyed the damage. "Could have been worse," he said finally. "We'll need a few repairs, but it's nothing we can't handle." Linda nodded, though her heart ached a little. This house had been the center of their lives, every memory of laughter, tears, birthdays, and quiet nights lived within these walls. Seeing it scarred felt like watching a piece of her own story crumble. Ethan noticed her silence. "Hey," he said gently, "we'll make it better. You'll see." She met his gaze, forcing a smile. "I know. Sometimes it feels like everything keeps changing, and I can't quite keep up." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a deep breath and said, "Change isn't always bad, Mom. Sometimes it just means life's moving us where we're supposed to go." Later that afternoon, they worked side by side, drying the floors, pushing furniture away from the wet spots, opening windows to let in fresh air. The sunlight slanted through the curtains, lighting the dust in soft golden streaks. At one point, Linda paused by the window, gazing at the garden outside. The roses Daniel had planted years ago were still standing, their petals weighed down with drops of rain. She smiled quietly at the sight. Ethan joined her, wiping his hands on a towel. "You kept them alive all these years." "I tried," she said softly. "Even when the winters got rough." He nodded. "Dad would have liked that." For a long moment, they stood there, watching the garden sway in the gentle wind. The silence between them wasn't heavy this time, it was tender. Filled with understanding, neither needed to speak aloud. Linda broke it first. "I miss him," she whispered. "I know," Ethan replied. "Me too." She turned to look at him, her eyes soft. "I think I miss the version of myself I was when he was here. I was lighter then. Braver, maybe?" Ethan's voice was quiet but steady. "You're still brave? You just don't see it." Linda wanted to believe him. But there were years she didn't talk about, years of loneliness, quiet fear, and the heavy ache of trying to smile when her heart was tired. She had carried those feelings quietly, like old letters folded and hidden away in a drawer. She looked at Ethan, her only constant, the living proof that love endures even after loss, and wondered if he'd ever truly known how much of her strength had been for him. That evening, they sat together in the living room. The heater hummed softly. A few candles flickered on the table, giving the room a gentle glow. Linda leaned back on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. Ethan was. The next morning dawned gray and quiet, with a faint chill still hanging in the air. The house smelled faintly of coffee and rain. Linda stood by the kitchen window, her hands wrapped around a warm mug, watching the sunlight slowly pierce through a thin veil of clouds. It was a new day, calm, almost fragile, the kind that felt like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Ethan walked in, still in his sweater from the night before, his hair slightly messy. He smiled when he saw her. "Morning, Mom. Did you sleep at all?" Linda shrugged. "A little. The house creaks differently now." He chuckled softly. "That's because you're listening harder." She smiled back but didn't answer. There was truth in his words. She was listening harder. To the quiet, to her heart, to all the things she had kept hidden for years. After breakfast, Ethan went outside to check the water pipes again, and Linda followed. The grass was still damp, glistening under a thin layer of dew. He crouched near the side of the house, inspecting the damage while she stood nearby, her arms wrapped around herself against the morning chill. "I think we'll need to call a plumber," Ethan said, squinting at the pipes. "But I can fix the smaller cracks myself." Linda nodded. "You always were good with your hands. Your father taught you well." He smiled faintly, then looked up at her. "You taught me patience." "He taught me to try." She felt a lump in her throat. "That's kind of you to say." Ethan hesitated, then added quietly, "You don't give yourself enough credit. Mom, you've done more than both of us ever could." The words hung in the air like a soft confession. Linda looked away, pretending to brush something from her sleeve. Compliments always made her uneasy. They opened old doors she wasn't sure she was ready to step through. By afternoon, they'd cleaned most of the house. The rhythm of ordinary work brought a strange kind of peace. There was laughter when Ethan slipped on a damp tile, and shared quiet smiles when they rediscovered a box of old photos in the attic. Inside the box were snapshots of birthdays, school plays, vacations, moments frozen in time. Linda picked up one photo. Ethan at 10 years old, missing a front tooth, standing beside Daniel with a fishing rod. They were both smiling in the sunlight. Ethan leaned over her shoulder. "That was the lake trip, right? You stayed in the cabin and made sandwiches for us." "I did," she said, smiling softly. "You two came back soaked and proud because you caught one tiny fish." He laughed. "It was huge to me back then." She turned the photo over in her hand, then sighed. "Sometimes I wish I could go back, just for a moment." to feel that simple happiness again. Ethan looked at her, his expression tender. "You still can, Mom. It's here. Just different now." His words were simple, but they hit deep. As the sun began to set, painting the living room in soft amber, Linda sat down by the window. The house was quiet again, except for the faint hum of the heater. Ethan came in and sat across from her, a thoughtful look on his face. There was something in his eyes, a mixture of worry and determination. "Mom," he began softly, "can I ask you something?" She looked up. "Of course." He hesitated, then said, "Why didn't you ever let anyone in again after Dad?" The question was gentle, but it landed like a stone in still water. Linda's heart tightened. She hadn't expected it, not from him, not today. She looked down at her hands, turning the empty mug slowly in her palms. "I don't know," she said finally. "Maybe I thought love only happens once. Or maybe I was afraid it wouldn't feel the same." Ethan leaned forward. "But don't you ever get lonely?" Linda took a long breath. "Sometimes. But loneliness feels safer than loss." He was silent for a while. The fading light caught the edge of his face, softening his expression. "I get that," he said quietly. "But you've given so much to everyone else. You deserve someone who gives you something back." Tears pricked at her eyes, unexpected and sharp. She tried to smile through them. "You sound too wise for your age." He gave a small, sad laugh. "I learned from the best." The room fell silent again, filled with all the words that didn't need to be spoken. Linda looked at her son, the boy she had raised, now a man, gently reminding her of something she had forgotten. That love wasn't a chapter that ends, but a story that changes shape. And suddenly, something inside her shifted. Maybe she didn't need to hide behind the comfort of solitude anymore. Maybe it was okay to admit she was still human, that her heart still longed for connection, for warmth, for the courage to start again. Her voice trembled when she finally spoke. "I was so busy being strong for everyone else. I forgot how to let myself be held." Ethan's eyes softened. "Then maybe it's time you let yourself rest. Mom, you don't have to carry everything alone." The simple truth in his words broke something open inside her. Not in pain, but in relief. For years, she had carried guilt, grief, and quiet fear. But now, as the last light of the day faded across their living room, Linda realized she wasn't alone anymore. She never had been. Ethan reached over and gently took her hand. "You don't have to be afraid of tomorrow," he said. "You've already survived the hardest part." She met his eyes, tears glistening, but her voice steady. "Maybe tomorrow will be kinder." And for the first time in years, she believed it. The evening sun cast long golden rays across the Myers living room. The repairs were nearly complete, the floors dried, furniture back in place, and the faint scent of fresh paint lingering in the air. What had started as a flooded house now felt like a home slowly reclaiming its warmth. Linda stood by the window, holding the small silver keychain Ethan had bought at the hotel. She turned it over in her hands, the words, "Home is where love stays," catching the light. A soft smile tugged at her lips. For years, she had measured life in struggles and responsibilities, never realizing that the simplest moments often carry the deepest meaning. Ethan walked over, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "Here," he said softly, offering one to her. "Thank you," she whispered, accepting it. They stood together in the quiet room, sipping tea, letting the peaceful silence stretch between them. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't empty. It was full of trust, understanding, and the unspoken knowledge that they were no longer alone in facing life's challenges. Earlier that day, Linda had walked through the garden, now bright with sunlight reflecting off the wet petals. The roses Daniel had planted still stood tall despite the storm's assault. Linda had run her fingers along their soft leaves, remembering the days when he was alive, when their little family had felt complete and unshakable, but she had also noticed something else, the resilience of life. Even after heartbreak, the roses had endured the storm just as they had. And in that quiet recognition, she felt something shift within her, a sense of hope she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. She turned toward Ethan, who had been watching her quietly. "You know," she said, voice soft, "sometimes I forget that life can be gentle after a storm." Ethan smiled, warmth spreading across his face. "Maybe it just takes a storm to remind us." Linda chuckled softly, the sound light and unburdened. She set the keychain down on the table. "This little thing. It's more than a keychain now. It's a reminder of tonight, of what matters." Ethan leaned against the table beside her, eyes thoughtful. "It's a good reminder. And it's not just for the house. It's for us too." The room grew quieter as evening settled. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Linda looked at Ethan, her chest feeling lighter than it had in years. There had been so much she hadn't said, so much she had held inside: grief, worry, the fear of growing old alone. But tonight, standing beside him, she realized that love and care weren't bound by loss or loneliness. They were living, breathing, and very much present in this moment. "Ethan," she began, her voice a whisper, "I've carried so much for so long. I didn't realize how much I needed to let go. You've reminded me that I'm not alone anymore." He reached out and gently squeezed her hand. "You're never alone, Mom. Not really." Tears brimmed in her eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of gratitude, of recognition, of love finally spoken without words. She nodded, unable to say more, letting the warmth of his hand and the quiet peace of the evening fill her heart. That night, after dinner and the last few chores, they sat together in the living room. The soft hum of the heater and the gentle creak of the house their only companions. The storm outside had left the night calm and clear. Through the window, stars began to appear, small and bright in the vast sky. Linda rested her head back against the couch, watching Ethan read quietly beside her. He didn't speak, but she didn't need him to. Every small gesture, every quiet presence had spoken volumes over the past 2 days. They had weathered a literal storm and, in doing so, had healed emotional storms long overdue. She thought of Daniel, of the years that had tested them, and of all the nights when hope had felt fragile. But now she felt something solid, enduring. The past with its grief and longing had brought them here to a moment of clarity, of connection, and of mutual love. Before bedtime, Linda placed the keychain in a small dish by the door, ready for when they left in the morning. It wasn't just a keychain. It was a symbol, a reminder that home wasn't simply a place, but the people who loved her. Ethan, in that moment, was both her son and her reminder that care, patience, and presence could rebuild even the most broken spaces. She turned toward him one last time, that N